Thank you for watching the Tank Museum's YouTube channel, and don't forget to subscribe. If you can support the museum, please think of backing us on Patreon or joining one of our membership schemes. Or if you watch to the end of this video, you'll be able to see how you can help the museum by buying items from our online shop.
Now, the tank we're going to look at today is the Comet, the A34 Comet. It appeared at the very end of the Second World War and was probably the best tank Britain produced. That's not saying much, but it's saying something. It was the best tank in terms of firepower. Other tanks have been modified to have better firepower, but this was built from the ground up to take into account the improved firepower, and that made a tremendous difference. Otherwise, the tank was criticised for its rather old-fashioned layout, the squared-off front, the way the machine guns mounted, but it soon got the better of everybody that used it. They began to prefer it to the tanks they'd had up until then, and that isn't bad. But the thing that really singles the Comet out is the gun. It's originally a Vickers Armstrong 75mm gun that they'd produced for the Cromwell. Now, the trouble was that it wouldn't fit the Cromwell. The turret for the Cromwell was too small, the gun was too big. So when the whole Cromwell programme moved across to British Leyland in Lancashire, Leyland decided to develop a new tank like the Cromwell in many respects, but designed from the ground up to take the new gun in a new turret. The big problem, of course, is the width. As the tank gets bigger, if you can, you want to make it wider. And we couldn't, because all our tanks had to be movable by rail, and the loading gauge on the railway almost dictated the width of the tank. It therefore meant that this tank that Leyland built had to have a new style of turret to take the gun. And they originally, as I say, talked about getting the Vickers Armstrong 75, but they decided in the end to ream it out to take the 76.2mm round, which had been designed for the Sherman Firefly. It made it more powerful. The trouble was that it was the length of case in the Firefly that made the round so long, that made the turret so much bigger, that they couldn't use on the Cromwell. So they come up with a new, shorter round. It used the 17-pounder pointy bit, the shell at the end, but the shell case was taken from a 3-inch howitzer, and the two were mated together, and that way they made a round that was just short enough to fit this gun, which is a shortened version of the Firefly's gun, and make it fit the turret and therefore fit the tank. It was known as the 77mm gun, not because it was 77mm, good heavens no. It was actually 76.2, but they wanted to make it clear that it was a new gun, so they called it the 77mm, and that's what you've got here. It was a really good gun. It was better than the 17-pounder, the 76.2mm gun. It was more accurate for a start, especially firing high explosive rounds. And it meant that this tank could take on quite a large German tank, a Panther or a Tiger, with a pretty good chance of knocking it out. And there weren't many tanks in the British Army you could say that of at the time. So from that point of view, it did make a difference. The tank has a crew of 5. That's 3 men in the turret, a driver who sits behind that circular opening in the front there, and on his left, the Hull machine gunner with a Beezer machine gun. So there's 5 altogether in the tank. The tank has Christie suspension, but because it's got 18-inch tracks, which are just that bit heavier than the tracks on Cromwell, they've added return rollers to the tank as well. The return rollers weren't really necessary. They thought they might be to keep the weight off the road wheels, but they found out afterwards you could manage without them perfectly well. Not that they did, but you could do so. This actually, for what it's worth, is a Model B, which you can only tell by the fact that it's got 2 fishtail exhausts at the back. The earlier version, the Model A, had the exhaust rising up out of the back of the engine deck, really, rather like the old Cromwell did. And you can always tell them apart, at least in action, because the Cromwells with the Type A, with the engine deck type exhaust, have a Normandy cowl fitted, which really isn't necessary on a Type B. And that's one way of telling them apart. The tank itself is in the markings of the Berlin Squadron of the Royal Tank Regiment, which really appeared at the end of the war, obviously, to operate in Berlin in the first place. So it's really done in more of a post-war configuration. That suits this Type B with the new exhausts on the back as well. It's really a very ideal tank. It's all welded construction. There's no riveting at all, so it's showing also some progress in tank construction. The hull is, as you can see, stepped at the front, fitted with a turret with this exposed mantlet, which was rather like the mantlet on the Centurion. It was designed by Stoddart and Pitt of Bath, and was a way of getting a larger gun into a normal sized turret. The tank is also fitted with the all-round vision cupola, which enables the commander to see out without sticking his head out and getting it shot off. And otherwise it's a very good and practical tank. It weighs 32 tons. It has a slightly slower top speed. They reduced the top speed to about 29 miles an hour, which was actually quite fast enough, but it wasn't as fast as a Cromwell. It's powered by the same engine, that is the Rolls-Royce Meteor V12, driving through the Merritt Brown transmission at the back, exactly the same as in Cromwell, but driving to this Christie suspension, as I said, but now with return rollers, supporting 18-inch wide tracks. It really is a good tank, one of the best we produced.
If you're interested in Second World War British tanks like the Comet here, you might like to pick up one of our models from the model shop. There's one there of the Comet, whole range of British vehicles. We've got books on how you finish them off, painting schemes. And of course, if you're really interested in the tank crews, what are their experiences, there's a great compilation of World War II tank crews memoirs, mainly from our archive by Bob Kershaw. We've got a number of those, some of which you'll know about: Troop Leader, D-Day to Victories, individual accounts, cracking one by David Render, tank action from his memoirs in the Second World War, one by Ken Tout. And if you're interested in some of the formations, Hobart's 79th Armoured Division and The Tank War by Mark Urban, and it follows the 5th Royal Tank Regiment. All I'd strongly recommend, great reads. We have a fantastic selection of books, models, clothes and other gifts on the Tank Museum online shop. When you buy from our online shop, you are supporting the Tank Museum charity, and that means we can carry on caring for our collection and producing this content. If you have supported us already, thank you very much, subscribe and do keep watching.